Welcome back to GAA Fan TV. My name is Aaron. I'm delighted to be joined here by Conor McKenna, not the Tyrone one, as you can probably see there. Well-known GAA fanatic and journalist himself. So great to have Conor on here to review through all the weekend's action, run through all the big talking points across the All-Ireland Senior Football Championship and the All-Ireland Senior Hurling Championship as well. There was a whole host of big moments, including Derry's big win against Tyrone, a result that very much did come to a big surprise to many people. You obviously had Monaghan, who comfortably dispatched down Clare and Limerick on to penalties as well. So plenty to discuss. Suppose first of all, Conor, what's the crack with yourself? You're keeping well?
Yeah, not too bad. Now I was up in Omagh yesterday in Mullingar Saturday night for the Westmeath Longford, so plenty of football this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what was that? We were chatting a bit off air there. I mean, in terms of obviously being at that game, like obviously a lot of Derry fans traveling up to Omagh for that game. So I suppose what was it like seeing those Derry supporters? I mean, I'd imagine they're probably over the moon. I mean, some of them are probably still there in the pubs and whatnot.
Yeah, well, I'd actually know a lot of Derry supporters personally, and I was chatting to some of them. They were very, very pleased, very thrilled. I think Derry had only won one Ulster Championship match in the last 10 years before yesterday, but I think that probably doesn't tell the full story because some of the draws were very, very tough. But I just thought yesterday, from day one when the draw was made, like other years, Derry might have been fun and saying, another Division 1 team were only probably beaten again the first round, but it was a different attitude this year with Derry. The attitude was very much, we can win this, and there was a total buy-in from the players in the league. We saw the league, they made a huge bounce. I think they were the first team ever to be promoted in the league, ever not to be promoted in the league since the new format came in 2007, while getting 11 points. So they were very lucky. I said it to a few lads, there was a lot made of Derry's record, or Derry's game against Galway in Owen Beg in the league this year when they kind of collapsed in the first 30 minutes. But that was Derry's only substandard performance probably in the last 2.5 seasons since maybe post when the action resumed in 2020 in October there. So Derry have played very, very well the last 2.5 years. They should have beaten Donegal last year, Ballybuffet. Had they won that game, they would have had a very, very good chance of beating Tyrone last year. And this year they've pushed on and proven that they probably are good enough to be judged at the very, very top end teams at the moment. And I'd say Rory Gallagher is very, very pleased.
100%, yeah. And as you were saying there, it was Tyrone 10 points, Derry 118. I mean, a commanding victory really from start to finish from the Derry men. And as you said there, Derry's first win against Tyrone in the championship since 2006. And actually they inflicted Tyrone's worst defeat at home in the championship since 1966. So a huge, huge victory to put up from Derry and Rory Gallagher's men. I mean, when you look at Derry in particular, when you've seen them sort of, the way they've come into this game, obviously being so, having played very well throughout Division 2, obviously very close to beating Donegal and Armagh the last 2 seasons. Like, was it that big of a surprise that Derry pulled off the victory here against Tyrone? Maybe obviously the margin of victory is probably a surprise.
No, and it was funny because my friend Donald Barry just presented Terrace Talk on Radio Kerry, and myself and Liam Brosnan and Donald were on there back after Kerry beat Dublin in February. And he asked me what was the dart long shot for the championship. And I said, I'll tell you now, Derry's going to beat Tyrone in round 1 of the Ulster Championship and could be All-Ireland contenders yet. But I think Donald gave me a tweet there yesterday. But Liam Brosnan was on, and he tipped Limerick as his dark horse, and they beat Clare. So it was one of the rare ones where shots in the dark come good. But yeah, it wasn't a surprise to my eyes at all yesterday, to be honest. I think if you look at the standard of club football in Derry, I think it's not only is it better than the standard of club football in Tyrone, but I'd say it's probably a good bit better if you look at it like on the basis that last year Steelstown won in All-Ireland. They were very, very comprehensive in the end in the final. That's a team growing in Derry City. That's another powerhouse for Derry that they're probably, it's a sleeping giant in the sense that they really need to exploit that minefield of Gaelic football, and they're doing that very, very much now. Gaelic football is growing in City. I think Sean Dolan's have been in a final very recently in junior, but like they're kind of coming as well a bit. So there's about 4 teams in the city on the edge in junior who are going to push up, and Steelstown now who won the intermediate last year. Like, so if you look at those, and like another good example is Glen, Waddy Graham's there, Malachy O'Rourke was managing them last year. But if you look at them, they drew with Kilcoo last year and could have won the game, and they could have easily won the All-Ireland as well. So while if you look at the Tyrone clubs haven't made anywhere near as much impact in the club series then. So I think that the standard of club football in Derry is very, very strong. The standard of schools football is very, very strong. I think St. Pat's Mahara, very, very good. They had a team there one year. A lot of the lads who played in that team, who played yesterday, would have played in that team, the likes of Conor Glass, Shane McGuigan, Shea Downey. I think they played against St. Brendan's in Killarney in the schools final. I think that was when David Clifford kind of burst onto the scene that year. But that team was a match for them. And I suppose when David Clifford was a minor in 2017, Derry, while they got an almighty beating in the final, at least they had got to the All-Ireland minor final. So I think this has been a long time coming, and Rory Gallagher's got a total buy-in. There's a real unified group there, and there's no reason why they can't go very, very far in this championship.
Yeah, and looking at Rory Gallagher in particular, because I remember listening to him last year, I think it was on the GAA Social podcast, and he was even talking about when he was part of the Donegal setup, and obviously the famous, I suppose, speech from Jim McGuinness when he said, when he first came in, he was saying, look, listen, if no one here feels that we're not going to win an All Ireland, you can get out and leave. And a couple of people laughed in the room and sort of looked at him like he was a bit crazy. Like, you'd look at Rory Gallagher, and even the way he was speaking about Derry last year, like, I really do think that he feels that he can get this team somewhere special. Like, he isn't just looking at this as, oh, it's great, we beat Tyrone, big shock. Like, he's looking at this thinking we can win the Ulster Championship and possibly even the All Ireland. I mean, they did beat the All Ireland champions, and they beat them very convincingly. I know Tyrone were down to 14 men for majority of the game, but it's a huge score to put up at the home of the champions.
Well, I think one thing that probably hasn't been pointed out with Derry, and this is where it could be huge for me, if they can win Ulster, and it's a huge task, and they're probably third in the favourites now behind Donegal and Monaghan. I wouldn't expect them to win Ulster at the moment. But if an Ulster title is pulled off, Derry will, providing it's Donegal they beat in the final and Cavan don't spring a shock, Derry will go into an All-Ireland quarter-final, and they'll be avoiding any of Kerry, Dublin, providing those teams win the provincial championships, Tyrone if they get through the qualifiers, and Donegal. So they could avoid those four teams in an Ireland quarter-final. So if they could avoid any of those four teams, they have a real chance of getting to a semi-final. Do you know that kind of? And then if they got to a semi-final having won Ulster, they'd be avoiding Kerry and Dublin, and more than likely avoiding a repeat pair in Donegal and Tyrone. So Derry's route to the final now they would have to beat Donegal and Ulster first. So Donegal's, but they could get to a final avoiding Kerry and Dublin. So there is definitely a clear pathway there, and you just get the sense that if there is 1 year, it could really be. I won't say now or never because I think they are coming as a county, but it could literally be their best chance of getting to a final a long time now. Is this Derry team going to beat Kerry? No, I don't think so at the moment, to be honest. Will they be organised, hard beaten and set up well? Yes, I think they will be hard beaten. Will they beat Dublin? I probably think it's a step too far beating Dublin and Croke Park as well, to be honest. But I do think it's a very well balanced team. Oran Lynch is playing very well in goals. They have very good backs, I suppose, without naming too many names. Christy McKay, Brendan Rodgers, exceptional yesterday. You have Conor Glass, who's very, very good midfielder. Like, he's one of the best midfielders in Ireland on his day. And you have Shane McGuigan lighting up the forwards as well. Like, so they have talent all around the pitch, and they're a very, very good side on as well. Rory Gallagher is a top manager. So I think Derry really have the ingredients. They're a very well balanced team. And there's, like, I suppose if you look the way Tyrone won the All Ireland last year, now I'm not saying Derry's going to go win All Ireland, but I do think they could definitely get to a final this year. It wouldn't be a major shock.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you go to the All Ireland champions and beat them by 11 points, I think it definitely puts you in the conversation. If Mayo went and beat Tyrone in their own backyard by 11 points, or Kerry did that, or Dublin did that, we'd all be saying, oh, these three, these are on course to win an All Ireland. So huge win for Derry. I suppose from a Tyrone perspective, though, like, a lot of inconsistencies with them this year. We've seen that throughout the league, like a whole host of indiscipline as well. I think they've nearly 8 red cards in total this year in the entirety of 2022. I mean, just very disappointing from them. Like, I know they were down to 14 men going into the final 15 to 20 minutes, and obviously for the majority or for the whole of the second half, but like, they just didn't really seem to show much fight or energy, or didn't really seem to have the options coming off the bench either.
Yeah, well, Dick Clerkin was absolutely slaughtered, I see, on social media for his column today. But like any team that ever wins in Ireland, you do need that element of luck. And I think anyone who argues otherwise is very, very delusional. I was listening to Barry Hearn on my way to Oma yesterday. He was saying there how he always get luck, and any people who are successful, they always do get the breaks. Like, and the Tyrone last year, the challenge is to take the breaks when they come to you. And last year, Tyrone got a few breaks, bounced the ball. They took them, they won the All Ireland. They said they deserved it. Very hard to disagree with that. Like, and this year, just things haven't gone as well for them, the kind of way. And I think, like, they've won All Ireland in the last 15 years. And I think that, like, a lot of those players really have been there for years. They deserve an All Ireland medal, and they soldiered on. And when you get to that when you cross that line, it's very, very hard to keep going back and back, type of way. And I think yesterday, the fact that about 8 or 9 lads had left the panel, and the absence of matching in Richie Donnelly as well, it all just kind of crumbled on them. I think the few players there mightn't have been as focused as they have been over years. And I just think Tyrone, I said to lads before the match, if Derry were going to win the game, they were going to win easy. There was going to be no Derry edging out with dogfights or Derry. I think if it got into any sort of dogfight, I think Tyrone would have more experience at home and a bit of a home support. They probably might have got over the line. But the fact Derry, they needed to kill the game early today, and they were very, very pleased. But Tyrone, look, last year the success was very, very much still there. The kind of way, and nobody can ever take that away from them. I think they're still very, very much in the qualifiers. Whether or not they do it, I'm not too sure. I think a lot of the big players who were very good last year just didn't play well yesterday at all. And Derry won the match all over the pitch in all 15 positions, including on the sideline as well. So I think Derry really total domination yesterday, and Tyrone will be. I just don't think now, like, if you're looking there just in the shoes of Fergal Loken and Brian Dooher this morning, can you take any positives from the game? very, very few I can take. The only positive I could take from a Tyrone perspective is they're not out of the championship and they have a second chance,
Yeah, absolutely. But even at that, like you look at the teams that are in those qualifiers. I mean, you've got Mayo in there, you've got Armagh there. You could potentially have Meath potentially dropping in there. Whole host of big counties really going to be in that sort of opening round of the qualifiers. So, like even Louth in there, like there's a lot of different stories for Tyrone. Maybe going up against Mickey Hart, going up against Mayo. Repeat of the All Ireland final. So for Tyrone, like although they do have this knack in the history and in the past of coming through the qualifiers and building into All Ireland semi-finals and finals, but at the same time, it's going to be very tough for them to find a way through there with some of the counties that are in there.
But it's funny you mentioned now, because again, not looking past Cavan, because they do have a chance of beating Donegal this weekend, but the likelihood is Derry, the winners of yesterday's game, which ended up to be Derry, will have to beat Monaghan and Donegal to get to the All-Ireland quarter-final. Now, Tyrone are into the qualifiers now. Now, they might have to play a third qualifier round if a Tailteann Cup team does get to the final, a provincial final, and Tyrone do manage to draw that. They are one of the unlucky teams that gets the extra preliminary round draw. But the likelihood is Tyrone will have to win 2 matches to get to the All-Ireland quarter-final. Now, are the 2 matches going to be as hard as Monaghan and Donegal? Well, it'd be very, very unfortunate if they were, But on the other hand, from a Tyrone perspective, they're going into the All-Ireland quarter-final and you're drawing a provincial champion. So you're drawing the likes of a Kerry or Dublin potentially. If they have won an Ulster title, they wouldn't be drawing any of those teams in an All-Ireland quarter-final. So that's where maybe there's a bit of a discretion there that maybe that's where Tyrone will suffer from yesterday. But to be honest with you, Aaron, I'm thinking if you're looking at any of the teams Tyrone can play in the qualifiers currently, I'd expect them to beat any of them. I think Derry are actually a much better team than people give them credit for, and they're in the top couple of teams in Ireland. And I think that yesterday was Derry were really, really up for it. I do think that Tyrone, and I'm going to include Mayo in that. Honestly, if I saw a draw in the morning qualifiers and I saw Tyrone drew Mayo and Castlebar, I'd fancy Tyrone to win, to be honest. I think that there still is definitely potential for them to do well in the qualifiers. I think now if they got to provincial final losers and they drew maybe a Donegal or Monaghan, maybe, or someone like that, it would be a lot trickier. But then they've always traditionally beaten Monaghan in knockout games. I just think Tyrone qualifiers, if they had anything about them, I didn't nearly expect them to get through them, to be honest.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Definitely, like I think you can definitely not write Tyrone off whatsoever, given the quality of players that they have. They're that type of county as well. They're a bit like Mayo in some respects. Every time you write them off, they seem to find a way to come back and bite you. Like, so you'd still have them in the mix anyway, in terms of getting to quarterfinals, semi-finals, or would you still think that Tyrone have it in them to win the All Ireland this year?
Well, I think I'd expect them to get through the 2 rounds of qualifier at the moment on paper. But to be honest with you, I would say, like, if you said to Jack O'Connor or Desi Farrell tonight, you're going to draw Tyrone in All-Ireland quarterfinal, I'd say they'd sleep reasonably well, to be honest. The type of way. I just don't know, is there the same sort of fear as there has been over years. Now, can Tyrone win the All-Ireland? It's very hard to know. I'd say anytime you write Tyrone off, they seem to bounce back. So I'm going to say I'm not going to write them off. But I suppose they can technically win Ireland, but I think at this stage I don't see it, Aaron, to be honest. Now, that's not writing them off, but no, I don't think at the moment they're going to be All-Ireland contenders. But I do expect them to get to the last 8. And I put it this way, I do think they'll be. Are they All-Ireland contenders? Maybe not, but they're certainly capable of taking a scalp and beating any team on their day. They're one of those teams like that. And if they were to come through the qualifiers and they got drawn on the side of Connacht, then they'd be playing a Roscommon or Galway or Leitrim in a Connacht final, in an All-Ireland quarter-final, and I'd expect them to beat any of those 3 teams, and then they'd be in the All-Ireland semi-final against the Ulster champions or the team that beats the Ulster champions. So again, I just think, Aaron, if Dublin and Kerry do win provincial title as expected, that whole side of the draw is suddenly very, very attractive for any team, because you're avoiding any of those teams. And I suppose a good comparison would be 2018 World Cup in the soccer, where Croatia ended up getting to the final, where the draw was a lot easier on one side. It became very, very lopsided. I think that's the potential for any team to get there. And I suppose if any team gets to that side of the draw and gets to the final, then suddenly they have a real chance in the final. The kind of way, because you'll either probably be playing a Kerry team who are under fierce pressure, or a Dublin team who know how to win in Croke Park big time. So the final will be a different ballgame altogether. But look, it's hard to see how it pans out. But Tyrone, I wouldn't. They're certainly capable of beating any team on their day in a knockout game. But do I see them as All-Ireland contenders at the moment? Probably not.
Yeah, and I suppose lastly, before we finish up on Tyrone and Derry, where does Rory Gallagher, in your opinion, rank amongst the elite GAA managers? I mean, obviously he hasn't achieved anything just yet, so he's obviously up and coming, and obviously you can't put him in the bracket of any of the greats because he hasn't done anything yet. But if he was to do something special with this Derry team, win an Ulster Championship, possibly even more, does he then start to get in the conversation as the McGuinnesses and everything else?
Yeah, I think himself and McGuinness had to take huge credit like for Donegal, and I'd say I'd nearly give him as much credit as McGuinness for Donegal getting over the line in 2012. To be honest, I think really Gallagher did help them. I think he's a really top manager, and no, I'd know Rory fairly well. He's a fierce, nice fella. It's a great time for him, but a real top manager, I'd say, and like he really got the most out of Fermanagh, and he's getting the most out of Derry. He was a bit unlucky in Donegal circumstances. They were unlucky to lose both of those Ulster finals, and I suppose he was there when Donegal were good. People forget that in 2012, and he's in 2011 and 2012. He's proved himself as a top manager, and yeah, no, he's very, very good. I think he's a type of manager where any county now, like there's no county I'd put him into where you'd say they wouldn't improve, the type of way. And I'd say he's contender now for a lot of big jobs. I'd say to be very, very much have him in the top bracket of manager at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people forget as well, he took Fermanagh within a kick of a ball from Division 1. So, he done a great job with Fermanagh. I think he got them to an Ulster final as well. So he's done great work there, make no mistake about that. You'd Monaghan 23 points down, 2-7, very comprehensive, comfortable win for Monaghan. I suppose very much expected, really. I mean, Down showed a bit of fight at the start of the second half of those 2 quick goals, but very comprehensive from the Farney men.
Yeah, well, I saw Down at the start of the year and they were very, very poor. And I think that they're very, very much a team in crisis at the moment, Down. And I was saying to someone during the week, like, they're the one team in the Tailteann Cup nobody would fear, like, if they're a county. Now, having said that, Down, what they need is an easy enough draw. I'm not going to name check teams to be disrespectful, but they need to have a gimme at home and build a bit of momentum, the type of way. Like, and I was saying what could be a great draw for Down would be playing out in New York, because they're a county with a real tradition, and you'd like to see them get it. They'd really do a bit of fundraising over in New York. They could really get a few of the old guard out there and maybe get a bit of camaraderie with the team, the group going to New York. That would be the type of draw I'd say Down would love, is playing out in New York, but I suppose the happiest man this weekend will be Seamus Banty McEnany, because he's after coming through. I won't say it was a banana skin because they were always going to be down, but he's after winning by 10 points, and all the hype is on Derry. And like Banty's nemesis in the Ulster Championship throughout both of his spells as Monaghan manager has been Tyrone. They've been able to beat any team. Now Tyrone have been taken, and Monaghan, this is their chance to grab an Ulster title. Like, the type of way. It could be the last hurrah for a lot of these players. I think they're a very, very good team, and they're a team that are Ireland contenders in my eyes. And will they be Kerry Dublin? No, but I can guarantee. Well, not no, but they're unlikely. But they will not lie down, and they would certainly have a chance of beating either of those teams. The type of way. And Monaghan could be dark horses for the All Ireland just yet, and it'll be I'm really, really looking forward to that game, Derry Monaghan in the semi final.
Yeah, and does this result, or even when you look at the amount of scores Monaghan had on the pitch as well, and we've seen this obviously against Dublin as well. Like, I feel like the belief that Monaghan are just a one-man team and are reliant or over-reliant on Conor McManus, I feel like those days are very much done. I mean, yes, he kicked 4 points, but you look at Jack McCarron, obviously he's continued on his form from the end of the league. You've obviously got Gary Mohan, who's come into the side. He kicked 3 points. So, like, for Monaghan, it seems so important, really, that they're now finding so many options all across their attack, because it gives them a huge chance, really, going up against the Derry. And then if they were to progress past that against the, potential Donegal in the final.
Well, I think Monaghan in 2013 is probably a bit like where Derry were now, where they kind of came as a total unknown quantity and stunned people, the kind of way. But now, I suppose Monaghan were unlucky not to get the All-Ireland final a few times. Tyrone have been their nemesis in knockout football especially, but Derry are a bit like that now, and they're very, like, Derry are a well-balanced team as well. Like, I suppose if you're looking at both of those teams, like I suppose Monaghan, they're definitely a one-man team. Like, McManus is a super footballer, but they're certainly not relying on him at all. I think they actually beat Dublin in the last round of the league without McManus. So
yeah, he's injured, yeah.
Like Rory Beggan is top-class goalie, the two uses around midfield, like, are machines there. Like, so they have a serious team, Monaghan, and they take, again, a very good backroom team management as well. They take very, very hard beating against Derry, and that could be the game of the championship, I think, in that game, because both teams that will be going gung-ho to win an Ulster title. Like, it won't be one of those games where they'll be saving something for later. It will be a real game. And I suppose if you look at the team now, like, it'll be a very, very well matched. Like, I suppose Oran Lynch has turned into a very, very good goalie for Derry. Now, probably Rory Beckin is still maybe a level above him, but like, Monaghan might have an edge there. But Derry midfield, like Conor Glass and these lads against Darren Hughes, Kieran Hughes will be a big, very, very big battle. The defence, like Monaghan, the Derry defence could match Monaghan, the likes of Christy McKay, Brendan Rodgers, as mentioned there. Like, and Conor Doherty was excellent yesterday, and Garrett McKinless. In the forwards, then like I think Shane McGuigan could become for Derry what Conor McManus has done for Monaghan, because he is a super, super footballer. That kind of way. And Niall Loughlin was very, very good yesterday as well. So, like, it was really and truly, if you look at that Derry team, like, there's no position where Monaghan are definitely better than them. And it's an astute enough background team of Monaghan. Liam Sheed is there, Donny Buckley, and a few more of those lads as well. So they certainly will not lie down, and I'm really, really looking forward to that semi-final.
Yeah, who would you be backing at this moment in time for that semi-final? I mean, it's such a tough one, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
To be honest, I fancy Derry to beat them, to be honest, just after what they done against Tyrone, the momentum around the county. And I think with Monaghan as well, like there still is plenty of inconsistencies in them, and they have had a lot of defensive issues this year. Like they conceded 2 goals in this down game, conceded a couple of goals against Dublin. Like I just have a sneaky feeling that Derry might just turn them over in that one.
But I think if I was a bookmaker pricing this match, I'd have both teams a 45% chance of winning the match and 10% chance of a draw. So you'd probably have Monaghan 5-4, Derry 5-4, and the draw at 9-1. But I suppose if you were looking at maybe pushing, it's very hard to know. Like I think Monaghan in terms of experience might have more of an edge, but then Derry might just have slightly better players. I probably think the right. And Rory Gallagher has beaten Monaghan as Fermanagh manager in semi-final in 2018, and I think he beat them when he was manager of Donegal in 2016. So he's had their number last 2 semi-finals. It might just edge towards Derry, but I'd give Monaghan every chance. That's really, really 50-50. But if I had to pick, really, I'd probably just go for Derry.
And as for Down, I suppose, like to finish up on them, I mean, obviously it's been a very disappointing year for them so far. They haven't won a game in the entirety of 22 in both league and championship. And going into that Tailteann Cup, as you were saying before, if they were to maybe play someone like a New York, like that would be a great occasion for a county like Down. And look, they've plenty of talent. We know that. They've plenty of good players. And at least they did show a bit of fight, at the start of the second half. But going into the Tailteann Cup, could you see them doing anything there? Could they be maybe, it's weird. I feel like maybe they're dark horses, but they shouldn't be really, because, they're coming down from Division 2. They should be one of the favourites, but I feel like no one's really considering them because of the fact of, I suppose, how bad of a year that they've had and issues behind the scenes and everything else, Well,
and it's a tricky one with Down. Like, I think that they should be going all to win the Tailteann Cup, but I just don't know is their interest there. There's no good vibes coming out of the camp. There's no positive energy. There's no interest in Down football at the moment. Like, and I suppose if they were to get an unglamorous Tailteann Cup match, and I suppose Aaron, the way to cover that is every match. Like, there's no, they're not going to disrespect any team by mentioning it, but there's none of the 15 teams in the Tailteann Cup are going to draw a big crowd to Park Esler for a Tailteann Cup game. That kind of way. Like, and I don't know how to get around it. Maybe I suppose the only thing I can see for Down, maybe it could be a bit of a left field idea, is move the match out to some club ground somewhere, put it out in maybe out in Newcastle or somewhere like that, kind of, and make it a bit of an occasion, get a bit of a local business going and make it look like a bit of a compact atmosphere and give it a bit of a go. I suppose this is a left field choice now, but bring it up to the mountains in Kilcoo maybe and because there's a bit of a disconnect between Kilcoo and Down, but bring a Down match to Kilcoo there in the Tailteann Cup and get a bit of buzz going around the place locally and try and get a bit of more of a, I don't know, there's just something going seriously around there. Like, there just doesn't seem to be any sort of buy-in or any sort of positive vibes, no energy, no support. But no, I couldn't see them doing anything in the Tailteann Cup, to be honest with you. And I think if they got a hard draw, they could be out in the first round. Like, I think if they got Cavan in Breffni Park, I'd fancy Cavan to beat them. I couldn't see them beating Cavan in the Tailteann Cup. Now, the only way down, like, I think Donegal, if Cavan were to beat Donegal next week and avoid the Tailteann Cup, then Down might be back in contention. But like, even looking at Westmeath on Saturday, my own county, I was watching with a bit of a bias had a night today. Westmeath would certainly be Down to play them in the morning as well. Now, Down did beat them last year and wear that, but I think Offaly beat them in the league. They're another Tailteann Cup team, like, as well. So I find it hard to be positive for Down at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most Down fans would certainly echo that sentiment as well. A bit of a crazy game here between Clare and Limerick. It was Clare 119, Limerick 216. Goes all the way to penalties in the end. Limerick winning it 3-1, I think it was, on penalties in total. A crazy game, really. Clare, a lot of missed opportunities. That goal chance right at the end, they probably could have won the game. Obviously, Limerick with a late free. Clare, obviously, Owen Cleary with a late free in extra time, taking it to penalties. Crazy game. The first ever penalty shootout at senior intercounty football level. So a big win for Limerick. And obviously they go marching on into the semis against Tipperary.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be a bit controversial. I hate penalty shootouts and toss them in the GAA. I just think they're really horrible concept and unfair. They're not a GAA concept at all. Like, and I just think it's one of the worst things that's come into the GAA in recent years. And I just think that the replays, there was nothing really wrong with the replays. They were kind of a nice part of the GAA calendar. And like, if you look at like the likes of Limerick and Tip, I think it's a Munster final in 2 weeks' time. I am sure Colin Collins and Billy Lee would have had no problem playing a replay next weekend. I think they would have absolutely no problem. And now I suppose there's the argument that if the replay had gone to a draw after extra time, what would you do then? Maybe you could have penalties then, but I would really, really have this as a last resort. I think it's totally illogical and it's very unfair on the Clare players. Like, but I think Colin Collins, he's done a brilliant job as Clare manager. But if you look now, like, he probably hasn't got the excuse now that he's been unlucky with the draw to play Kerry, because the 2 years they've avoided Kerry and Cork, they've lost to Tipperary and to Limerick, you know, so it's a bit like Limerick to win in Ennis is a big enough win for them as well. Now, having said that, Aaron, and this is in no disrespect for the two teams involved, but providing Kerry are to beat Cork, I cannot see how any of those teams are going to live with Kerry in the Munster final. Like, I think Cork, well, how many points Cork would beat Kerry would beat Cork by and Cork win this weekend? I think they still give them a better challenge than Limerick or Tipperary in the final, to be honest. And I think Clare, the way they played in Division 2 for so long, they might have had players that could have lived with Kerry for the first 15, 20 minutes, but I just don't think Limerick and Tip will have that. Now, having said that, it'll be an occasion for both of them to get to the final. I think last year, Kerry won their 44th successive game in the championship in a row against Tipperary. And like that this year, if they do play again, it'll be 45, you know, that kind of way. Like, Kerry could be going into an All-Ireland quarter-final very, very cold. Now, again, it's meant in no disrespect because Billy Lee is doing a very, very good job in Limerick and he's doing the grounds. And I think Limerick are actually improving a good bit all the time. So, like Tipperary as well, David Power is working in, I suppose he's working in a challenging enough set of circumstances, in the sense that the underage probably has dried up a bit in Tip at the moment and he's probably going to a county where the emphasis is always going to be on hurling, like, you know, like it's the same in Limerick, like, and it's probably the same in Clare. The glamour in those, and it's probably the same in Cork for that matter. The glamour in those counties is the county hurling team. They bring in bigger crowds, more interest in that. But no, I can see Kerry. I think Kerry's definitely going to win Munster. But I suppose just going back in the match, Limerick showed serious character to eke out a win. And I suppose again, if it could be 2020 again, if Cork can somehow cause an absolute miracle next Saturday night, it would make the Limerick Tip match a lot more interesting in the Munster semi-final.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and I think everyone would very much agree with what you said there. Like, in terms of, you know, I think we all know very much that Kerry are going to win this Munster Championship. Every dog in the street probably knows that at this stage. But I do think it is that, you know, occasion, obviously, of a Munster final, and obviously given the fact that there is qualifiers, you know, for either Limerick or Tipperary, if they were to go into the Munster final and then get beat by Kerry. You know, maybe you get a good draw in the preliminary round, and then maybe you go into an all-Ireland quarter final. And what a story that would be for, you know, a county like Limerick in football, which have very much been, you know, a predominant Division 4, Division 3 team for the last 10 years or so. And that's what I was going to say about Limerick. Like, they've kind of come under the radar quite a bit, haven't they, in the last couple of years? Like, Clare have obviously been consistent Division 2 team, you know, very competitive in there. Gave Mayo a good run for their money last year in that Division 2 promotion playoff. But Limerick, like, they're building quite a lot, and you've obviously got, you know, an academy down there as well. You see the growth of the hurlers. Like, so for Limerick, you know, if they could get to a Munster final and beat Tipperary, like, the buzz that it would give Limerick football, I think, in general, even if they were beaten 15, 20 points by Kerry, I still think the buzz and the excitement around the county would be very big for Limerick football. And it might be, you know, the slow start of something of them being quite competitive in the Munster Football Championship.
Well, the way I'm looking at Limerick the last couple of years is Billy Lee has done a very good job and they've got promotions in the league. But I think that while they're definitely improving, I don't know, are they anywhere closer to the top teams, to be honest. I just don't see a scalp in them, or to be honest. Like, and I suppose, again, it's no disrespect at all, but if Tipperary were to beat Limerick and like Tyrone were to draw Tipperary in the qualifiers, there's no way I could see Limerick beating Tyrone for that matter. You know what type of way? So I think that while they've improved a lot and they're doing a lot of great work, the structures are good there and there is passion for football in Limerick, I don't see them capable of causing a shock in the qualifiers, to be honest with you. And could I see them getting to the All-Ireland quarter-final themselves or Tip? To be honest, Aaron, I suppose, again, it probably doesn't make sense this because Tip might be like Limerick are division higher and have beaten, I think, in a few league games, but I could see Tip being a bit more feared in the qualifiers in Limerick, to be honest, you know, at the moment. Now, that's not taking away the work Billy Lee is doing and the players are putting in serious effort, but I just don't know whether they're capable of taking a shock. Now, I could be wrong and they could be in the All-Ireland quarter-final, but I don't see it on a personal level, to be honest. Now, having said that, I do probably expect them to beat Tipperary in semi-final at the moment, you know, and I think that they could maybe, it'll be interesting to see what they do against Kerry. We'll learn a bit more about them then, how many points they lose by. With disrespect, like, they're probably not going to win the match. Will they lose by 10? Would that be a good result? Would they lose by 25? That would probably be a disaster, you know, the kind of way. But I suppose the challenge for Limerick would be to get to the Munster final, compete as well as possible. Maybe they might cause a miracle. Maybe they could come home with the cup. But no, I probably think they're just that bit off this year. Maybe now they are improving gradually, but I think they're a good bit off this year, being a serious threat in the qualifiers.
Yeah, and I suppose, as you were saying there about Tipperary, they obviously got a comfortable win away to Waterford, 2-13 to 1 8. And I suppose, yeah, like Tipperary, they certainly probably will be more feared. They obviously have that track record of a couple of big wins, a couple of big scalps, obviously, in the last decade or so. But they have introduced a few new lads to the team this year. Obviously, Mikey O'Shea's come in there, Mark Russell as well. So for Tipperary, although they've lost a lot of talent in the likes of Mickey Quinlivan and Colin O'Riordan in the last couple of seasons, I'd imagine David Power will be fairly happy to see some of the new lads come in there and stepping up to the mark so far anyways.
Yeah, no, Power's a serious manager and he's done serious work for Tipperary football, and I suppose he's been there in the dugout for two of the great successes in the All-Ireland minor victory over Dublin and then obviously the 2020 Munster Championship game. But yeah, he'll be pleased enough now. I think they were going to beat Waterford on Saturday night. But having said that, Waterford drew with them in the league and probably should have won the match, and it was probably banana skin. The Waterford's record in Munster has been very, very poor against Tipperary and Limerick, and the only team I think Waterford have beaten recently in Munster is Clare, and I think that they beat them when Paddy O'Shea was manager that year. I think it was 2007, and they might have beaten them once since. I think they beat Wexford away in a qualifier in 2018, but apart from that, they haven't really done anything in the championship. I think they've lost a lot of matches by a point. They're a bit unlucky in that sense, but no, I think it was probably a game. I suppose you could say they were always going to win it on Saturday without being disrespectful to Waterford. And yeah, they're a Division 14, they're promoted Division 3. Tipper are the type of team. It's probably a tough one because they won't want to lose to Limerick at all. But if they're in the Tailteann Cup, they could probably win the Tailteann Cup. I think that that's another team to down. I wouldn't be able to see down beating Tip in third is the way they're going at the moment. So Tip, while they need to, I think the main thing for Tip is that they're going to lose one game, whether it's the final against Kerry or it's the semi-final against Limerick. And the challenge is to make sure that they can stay focused and stay competitive for the next game, whether that is a Tailteann Cup last 16 game or whether it is an All-Ireland last 12, whatever last round of the qualifiers, So that's what Tip. Yeah, Power's doing a good job, and it was another nice win for them on at the weekend.
Yeah, we'll move on to the results from the Leinster Football Championship. So you had Wexford 4 points, Dublin 124. I mean, no surprise really here at all. Dublin were always heavy favourites. What did you make of the Dubs yourself? I mean, I suppose it looked like they things back in order. Obviously early days yet, and you certainly can't be getting too carried away. But command and victory, and obviously Con O'Callaghan back in the side, Owen Merchant back in there as well. So great results, I suppose, for the Dubs.
Yeah, it was one of those games, Aaron, where without being trying to gloss over, we learned absolutely nothing about Dublin. I think they were always going to win that game. Wexford came very near the bottom of Division 4. It wasn't a banana skin for Dublin. Last year they played Wexford, they struggled, and the writing was on the wall from there. They didn't play well. So I suppose this year it did look more like the old Dublin. But does this mean that Dublin's problem of getting relegated they were never in crisis? So I'm not going to say crisis. They were never even going that bad. I don't think relegation is that big of a deal for short term for Dublin, to be honest. But look, have we learned any more than we knew at the last round of the league? The answer I'd say is definitely not. I think the Meath game we learned a small bit more, but Dublin, it was always going to be a game they were going to win, and they obliged with top marks.
Yeah, and I suppose was the impressive thing maybe from a Dublin perspective, because I know from watching Dublin, particularly in the Jim Gavin era, Dublin would make a habit of beating teams in the Leinster Championship by 20, 25 points, and they didn't need to, they could take their foot off the gas, late on in the second half. Obviously, they rotation, bring new players in, and those players would kick a couple of scores and all the rest. But like under Desi Farrell in particular in the Leinster Championship last year, not so much in 2020, but last year, there was a lot of sort of complacency in there, I felt, in the Dublin side. Like against Wexford, we weren't really quite at it. We allowed Meath to come back into it. Against Kildare, we were very comfortable, but generally speaking, the sort of the standard didn't seem to be quite as high as sort of the Jim Gavin era. So, I mean, that could probably be a big takeaway from a Dublin perspective, is that they look like they're going to treat this Leinster Championship as serious as they have in previous years. And I suppose they need to, really, because, there are a few people who believe that they could get caught in Leinster at some stage,
Well, this is now purely my own opinion. I don't know if this is wrong, but I think this really is the last of the traditional Dublin, as we'd say, because if you look at that team, there's a lot of lads with a lot of miles in the clock, the likes of James McCarthy, Mick Fitzsimons, Johnny Cooper, Dean Rock to an extent, John Small, those lads to name a few. And they could really see this as the last hurrah, and it's probably going to be the last year for Desi Farrell as well. So a lot of the core players and management, this could be the last hurrah, and they probably might see this as their last chance to win an All-Ireland medal. And I think a lot of them are going for record breaking to win. I think it could be a 9th medal on the field to play in the case of Mick Fitzsimons and James McCarthy. So I suppose in that sense, this really could be a huge for Dublin. And also, the reason I'm saying we could see big next year, we could have a lot of new lads playing for Dublin. The Leinster Championship be a lot more irrelevant. There'll be a new format totally, which will make it a bit harder for teams like that. And also, we'll have new management in the line. So now, are the Dublin players as good a level coming through? I don't think the common consensus seems to be they're not. Now Kerry, I think, that's where Kerry have probably just maybe passed Dublin, is the bench. The bench for Kerry now is very, very strong, and it's the way Dublin used to be. You used to see the fourth official coming up the board, and it would be very good subs coming on for Dublin. It would really improve them. While now you see Kerry of the likes of Killian Spillane coming on, these fellas, and they seem to be getting a bit of energy off the bench. And that's where I think this is good. This is the All-Ireland Cup we won this year, is the strength of the benches. But I do think Dublin, they really seem to be going back to the pack. Now, I don't know. I think where Dublin could have a bit of an issue, though, is in the goals. I don't know if Dublin got a settled goalie. Now, David O'Hanlon hasn't really got a big test in the Dublin jersey yet. Now, is he going to be the number one goalie? Is Evan Comerford? And with no disrespect to the lads, the most ardent Dublin supporter in the world couldn't argue they're anywhere near as good as Stephen Cluxton. Do you know that kind of way? I think that's where, and another issue I think Dublin might be caught out this year is in midfield. I think those two areas could be there. Now, if Brian Fenton plays his best bit, and Fenton did look good the last day, if Fenton plays well, Dublin won't have an issue in midfield. But I just don't know, are they as strong as they have another year? I think that's where I think there's definitely an issue for Dublin in terms of the goalkeeper and strength in depth, and also in maybe an issue in midfield. But having said that, I think at the moment, hand on heart, it's probably a 2-horse race for the All-Ireland title between Kerry and Dublin.
Yeah, I don't think midfield we're not too bad. I think Brian Fenton is, especially with a performance like that against Wexford. The problem is if someone does man mark him when you come up against a top midfield, against a Kerry, a Tyrone, who've obviously got brilliant physical midfielders, it becomes tough because Dublin have struggled for a while to find a partner for Fenton. It's been McCarthy, it's been Lahif, it's been Padder O'Colford-Byrne at different stages. So we've had a couple of different partners in there. And as you said, yeah, I personally go with Comerford. I think Comerford is very good goalkeeper. I think his kickouts are very good. Look, he's nowhere near the level of Cluxton. I think we all know that, but I think he has been very good, and I would be surprised if he isn't the number one this year. But certainly a big result for Dublin, no doubt about that. Meath, they put up a big victory against Wicklow, 4-13 to 1-12. The quickest goal in the championship, I believe, championship history from Jack O'Connor, although there has been a few people on Twitter I've seen disputing that at the minute. But for Meath, look, I mean, they beat Wicklow very convincingly there a couple of years ago again, so probably no real big surprise here.
Yeah, I think Meath probably turned their season around after the Offaly game in the league. The last minute goal against Offaly seemed to give them a bit of resurgence because they drew it down at home, drew it Offaly away. I think they went out and beat Clare then and beat Cork comfortably. And they played well enough against Derry despite losing another big win here. So I suppose Meath, again, we don't know too much about them. I don't know what level Wicklow are at. They've improved, but they're still got relegated to Division 4 and they're not the standard team that you need to be testing yourself about if you want to be playing Dublin in the next round, So I think Meath, it was, again, very much like Dublin against Wexford. It was job well done and on to the next day. But Andy McEntee would not have liked to have drawn Dublin. I think he would have much preferred I think Westmeath probably would have been the preferred draw, and then Kildare and Dublin would have been last. But I'd say, I suppose they'll get stuck into Dublin to see how they got on. They were close enough last year. See how Dublin got any better or worse, whatever, But at the moment, I find it hard to see Meath beating Dublin, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a strange one with Meath because they've plenty of great footballers and they've brought through a good amount of young lads in the last couple of years, like Cathal Hickey, Matthew Costello, Jordan Morris. And when they've played Dublin, it's like their heads drop quite a lot. They sort of take a bit of a beating in the first half and then their heads drop. And last year they obviously came back into it, but mainly because I think Dublin allowed them to come back into it. So how could you see that game going? Could it be another one-sided hammering in favour of the Dubs, or could Meath maybe, make a bit of a game of it?
One thing I've noticed with this Dublin team, whenever they play Meath, they seem to maybe latch on to tradition. They really, really go and play to their best ability against Meath, and I suppose if Dublin play to their best ability against Meath, Meath have no chance of winning the game. But Meath's second half last year, I suppose, in hindsight last year, I suppose this isn't the way matches work, but the fact they lost by 6 points and Dublin had one penalty decision that was very debatable, and Meath were denied one penalty decision that was very debatable. I think there could have been a black card in it, so it could have been a 6-point turnaround. Look, they could have got something, but I suppose that's what Andy McEntee to be able to latch on to Meath, that they weren't that far off this year. And I suppose he'd be able to say Meath came, was it 4th or 5th in Division 2 this year, and Dublin are a Division 2 team as well. So I suppose in hindsight, there's a lot there that Dublin could kind of, maybe that Meath could maybe latch on to. They're probably this year, the players for me, probably going with maybe 7, 8, maybe 9, 10% chance of winning that match, while other years they probably went in with 0 to 1% chance, that kind of way. So this year there is some sort of scope that they could, I won't say, compete is, I suppose, the word. If I'd say now, I know that to be this crap about we don't do moral victories, all this routine, but if Meath come out with there with a 5-point loss against Dublin, I'd say they'll be relatively happy, to be honest, and they'll be set up enough for the qualifiers,
Yeah, we'll be curious to hear certainly what Meath supporters think in the comments down below or live or whatever in terms of that game. But Kildare, I mean, this was, I suppose, on paper meant to be a bit of a banana skin for Kildare, obviously going up against Mickey Hart's Louth, but they dealt with it very, very well. 222 to 12 points, very comfortable game. There were 10 points to 1 up quite early on. Louth certainly struggled to get their shooters on the ball, such as Samuel Roy. So for Kildare, you have to give them a lot of credit, because going up against a Louth side that, we all kind of thought would be a bit of a banana skin. I think a lot of us did expect Kildare to get the victory, but very, very convincing. I mean, a 16-point win against a Louth side that had won 7 games in a row coming into this. So that's a big score for Kildare to put up against Mickey Hart's men.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I'm going to say, Aaron, if you said to Glenn Ryan and Johnny Doyle going on the bus yesterday morning that they were going to beat Louth by 16 points and draw Westmeath in semi-final, let's say he would have absolutely been delighted, that kind of way. And now I'm Westmeath, proud to be from there, but I'm not talking down. But I don't think that was the draw they would have wanted instead of Meath or Dublin, that kind of way. And that's not being disrespectful, but like the fact I thought Louth, before the match I expected Kildare to win, but I thought Louth would compete with them. I thought Kildare might win by 5 or 6 at the most. I didn't see them winning by 16. Louth will be very disappointed. I think Mickey Hart has done a super job there in the league. Championship, I'd say he probably hasn't done a very good job. Now, having said that, Aaron, it's very, very harsh because he's had 2 matches, one against Offaly, which they lost, and after extra time, and one against Kildare, which they got hammered. But the league, they have gone up to Division 2, but Championship is what you'll be remembered for, really, the kind of way. And I suppose a big qualifier win will be big for Louth, but I suppose this is daft now. But the fact that they're not in the Tailteann Cup is nearly a bad thing for Louth, because I think the way Mickey Hart has the team playing, they could definitely have won that Tailteann Cup, and that would genuinely have been a big enough deal for Louth, But they could definitely, again, it's going back to the qualifiers. It's a bit like the Limerick conundrum, Aaron. Could you see them beating Tyrone and Omagh? Now, I think for a start, it's a draw. Everyone wants to see Mickey Hart going back to Omagh. Now, one thing I will say, if that draw is made, I really hope the Louth County Board do go gung-ho to get that match played in Gaelic grounds, draw that. The kind of way, rather than being moved to some neutral ground. But Louth, I suppose, Mickey Hart is getting, I always say, when you have a good forward like that, they can do something. Like Mullery is a special player. If he can score the lights out, they could cause a shock the way Tyrone if they're after coming off a very bad defeat. But I think it's very hard to see it. And I suppose Louth, if they got, now having said that, Aaron, there's a few teams in the qualifiers they could play that they could beat. The qualifiers are not definitely not. There's not going to be one. They could easily beat the likes of maybe a Cork or a Clare or Limerick, maybe if they got them, or one of those teams. The kind of way. So Louth could easily win a qualifier game, but I think Mickey Hart yesterday, it's a very, very big setback after a very, very good year.
Yeah, and you mentioned your own county there. It was Westmeath 3-13, Longford 14 points. So I'd imagine you're happy enough with that result anyways. And you were saying obviously you were at the game. So I mean a big win for Westmeath against Longford. And obviously with Longford having beaten you in the league, I suppose a sweet feeling to get revenge and back into the Leinster semis for a second year in a row.
Yeah, I think that game against Longford in the league, it felt more than it nearly felt like a championship defeat on the basis. Not only did it cost Westmeath a place and would win the matchups, but it cost them probably promotion in the end and a chance to get promoted to Division 2 and get to a league final. So it was with Westmeath, to be fair, after the Longford games, the mood around the county was very, very doom and gloom. They had lost to Louth the week before, but now they've had 3 games in the league where they got 5 points out with possible 6. They're very unlucky to miss out on promotion, and now they're after beating Longford easily in the first match championship. Now, Westmeath, they did exactly what they didn't do in the league, which is in the league game, they let Longford stay in the game as long as possible, and then Longford just got ahead and didn't relinquish the lead. They looked much more hungrier, fitter. This time, Westmeath got ahead early and didn't let Longford back in the game. So, a very, very good spin. Now, Longford were very, very poor on the day. Westmeath were very, very good. I think the way I was saying to people after the game, Aaron, Westmeath probably had a 7 out of 10 performance. Kind of way, 7.5, where it was very good on the day. They didn't do a whole lot wrong, but if they're going to beat Kildare, they're going to need to improve an awful lot. And look, I think that Westmeath, if the draw they didn't want to play was Dublin, the next draw, I suppose they wanted. I'd say the draw Westmeath might have probably wanted last night would probably be Meath. They got Kildare. Look at it, both Meath or Kildare, probably not too much between the teams, but probably think it's probably a hard task to see Westmeath beating Kildare at the moment. Now, they only lost by 2 points last year, and Westmeath arguably should have won that match. So it's not an impossible draw, but I definitely have Kildare favourites,
Yeah, because I was going to say that as well. I mean, and your general thoughts really on Westmeath, because I remember obviously when we were sitting on the J-Back podcast there, I suppose, just before the league, and I was saying I was very convinced that Westmeath were going to get promoted because of how well they played last year and how well they finished up. They gave a lot of very good performances, I felt, in my opinion, but it obviously didn't work out that way in the league. Like, a lot of inconsistencies in there, and obviously no promotion, finishing third in the end. And as you said there, like, you gave Kildare a good run for their money last year in that Leinster semi-final. Now, I do think Kildare are a bit of a better team this year. They seem to have a bit more of their act together. They've brought in a few, more players into their squad, into their panel. So, like, how could you see that game going? Would it be comfortable for Kildare? Could Westmeath maybe cause it a bit of a shock, or what do you reckon?
Well, when I was in Croke Park in 2016 when Westmeath beat Kildare, and they beat Meath the year before. But after that game, Dublin played and they were scintillating, and you knew Westmeath, realistically, you knew that while they had got to the Leinster final, there was no chance of winning it. Like, so I think going to the Kildare match this year, like last year when people were sitting in the sand, like after the Westmeath, they would have seen Dublin and probably thought, they're not going as well as other years. Maybe we could have done something, if they won. But this year it's interesting to know. But Westmeath, have they a chance against Kildare? They have a chance. Like, they're not, no point saying they're not. But Kildare, like I say, like, the bookmakers don't usually get things too wrong. Like, if looking at the handicap there, it's probably going to be 5, 6, 7 points in Kildare's favour. The kind of way. Like, that's the reality. Like, it's a team that beat Dublin and beat Monaghan in Division 1 and drew with Kerry. Like, Westmeath didn't get promoted in Division 3. So, look, it's not going to be easy for Westmeath, but it's certainly not an impossible task. And I think if everything did click, Westmeath would certainly have a chance of victory. And I suppose, if Westmeath were to get the win, I'd just seen it's been announced a double header in Croke Park, and I don't think the times are announced just yet, but Westmeath or Kildare is 99% certain to be done on the undercard. It's the first game on those two. So, look, if you could see Westmeath winning and you'd like to sit in the stand and see Dublin and potentially, I wouldn't say Meath beat them, but you could see our Dublin there for the taking or not. Like, and personally, I think Dublin will win a Leinster Championship this year, and I think Westmeath, but going back to the question, can they beat Kildare? The answer is yes. Do I think they'll beat Kildare? Probably not.
Yeah, I'd have to agree there as well. I think, when you look at it, Louth obviously got a victory against Westmeath, and you've seen what Kildare have obviously done to Louth, beating them by 16 points. So you'd certainly have to fancy Kildare going into that one. You had Sligo 11 points, Roscommon 23 points the last game to wrap up our football action. I suppose it went very well as expected. Obviously Sligo with that early red card certainly probably disrupted them quite a bit, but it went very well as expected, really. I think everyone's seen this result and said, yeah, that's probably fair.
Yeah, but just one thing I'd like to just say on this match, it was €30 for stand tickets, and I think that's an absolute rip-off price. I don't see how that's logical at all. Like, and like, if you look, like, just presuming that Galway Leitrim is going to be the same price, €30 for stand tickets, that's €10 a year in stand tickets for Galway and Kilkenny yesterday, which is a cracker of a box office hurling game. So that's completely inconsistent and illogical in my eyes. But I suppose just getting back on the match, Roscommon was 12-point win. Anthony Cunningham, Sligo have a bit of a good enough record against Roscommon, so could have been a tricky game. Roscommon navigated with flying marks, and they'll be very, very confident ahead of the kind of final, a rematch to the league final, providing Galway don't suffer a massive upset against Leitrim.
Yeah, and provided it is Galway that get the better of Leitrim, like, would you fancy Roscommon to turn over Galway for a third time this year, or could Galway, I suppose, building on from a result against Mayo, and obviously provided they beat Leitrim, which I think we all expect, you would look at it and think, I mean, that's going to be a very hard one to call, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I nearly fancy Galway. I think Galway are actually a good enough team, and Joyce probably would like a kind of title, and they have got serious belief after that beating Mayo in the league, or in the championship, sorry. But if you look, like, when Shane Walsh came on against Roscommon, he totally changed the game. I think one thing, Galway, they went up to Derry and Owenbeg and won by 10 points, which it looks a better result now after yesterday as well. So I think Galway are a better team than Roscommon. Now, whether or not they'll show it or not, I don't know. But when I say Galway are a better team, I think it's only just margin. I think Galway might just edge home that game if it is final. But I suppose I would be disrespectful to Leitrim to be previewing the final when we don't know who's in it. But I'd be surprised if Leitrim were to beat Galway, and surprised with a capital less in that sense, to be honest. I think Galway should win that game with no questions asked.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I suppose we'll move on to some of the hurling action then, and run through some of the big games and big talking points here. And I suppose the big one really from the weekend was Galway and Kilkenny. Certainly a game that hasn't, had any short of drama really down the years, and certainly not short of drama in this one again. Henry Shefflin obviously going up against Brian Cody, and you had the I suppose the firm stare, shall we say, from Brian Cody at the full-time whistle on Henry Shefflin right there. But look, for Galway, big result. I mean, yes, it was a very contentious free at the end, and I think a lot of people very much in disagreement that was a free. But for Galway, that's a big win in my opinion, because really since 2018 they haven't really had too many big championship wins in my opinion. So huge win for Galway against Kilkenny.
Yeah, but I think the first thing I'm going to say, Aaron, is I think the handshake has been completely blown out of proportion. Like it was a handshake, and it was moved on. Like Kilkenny Galway won by a point. I just don't think it was as big anywhere near the deal. But I think that's probably part of the bigger issue we've had in the hurling championship and probably the football as well. There's a lack of real subplots or storytelling or any sort of narrative. Like it seems very boring, and I suppose this could be very famous last words, but it could be Kerry and Limerick both winning the All Ireland season. Now Dublin look like they're going to probably put a spanner in those words, but it just seems like it could be a championship in football and hurling without any sort of real drama, or any sort of real subplots or anything like that. Now the fact that there was a bit now, and maybe that's why people seem to be kind of getting a bit more excited when they see some sort of what looks like conflict between two former stars in Cody and Henry Shefflin. But I think one thing, Brian Cody owes so much of his managerial career to Henry Shefflin, was Kilkenny's best player when they won how many All Ireland. So there should be absolutely no bad blood around the Aussie there at all. And I don't think there is. I think Brian Cody pretty snide about losing the match, to be honest with you, more than anything. But look, I think Galway are a better team than Kilkenny. They won. Now, one thing for Galway is they can't be going 20 minutes without a score in big championship matches like that. It's not anywhere nearly good enough to win All Ireland now. But I was saying to someone there, what Galway need to do, Aaron, is win Leinster titles. They shouldn't even be thinking beyond that, at all. They have the best set of players in Leinster, in my opinion, across every age group every year. They have the best, they're consistently the best team run underage in Leinster, and they've consistently probably had the best panel in the senior championship. So they should be winning that Leinster title every year. There's no excuses now for Galway not coming in the top two every year with the way the round robin group works. And if they can get to a provincial final every year, then if they can win a Leinster championship every year, which they should be able to nearly eke out a situation where if there's 5 Leinster championships, they should be able to win at least 3, if not 4, if not 5. And then you're in the All Ireland semi-final, and you're avoiding playing the Munster champions in a semi-final. So there's a huge reward for Galway for winning a Leinster title, and that should be their target. And I think that's what Henry Shefflin probably angling at now. Like, people were kind of, I suppose, the Wexford match and this game, they've been similar enough games that Galway have been the better team in both of them, but have let the other team back in when the game should have been dead. But they've also got 2 good results, and the Dublin, providing they beat Laois in the next game, the Dublin game is a free shot for them in the sense that they're coming third, they guarantee top 3. But I think they'd like to beat Dublin and come in the top 2 and win a Leinster. I think that would be a big deal for Henry Shefflin in his first year, and it would show that they've made progress considering they haven't won any of the last 3 Leinsters. And I do think Galway this year they will win a Leinster title.
Yeah, I think it's a big win, as you said before, and I suppose I was a bit worried watching it for them. Just 6 points after the 36th minute, and you were seeing Kilkenny sort of do what they do, which is get a late goal, and obviously a flurry of points before, and sort of come back from 8-9 points down. And you were, when that kind of incident happened around the free, I was nearly convinced it was going to be a Kilkenny free, because that's sort of what they do. They seem to find a way of getting themselves out of these sort of big situations, but. As you were saying there with Henry Shefflin, I mean, a lot of positives to take, and especially for a lot of these young players, and coming in, the likes of Brian Concannon, Fintan Burke, and a few others. Evan Nyland obviously is another player that springs to mind as well. So, I mean, a lot of positives for Galway, and I suppose 1 foot really, probably give or take in that Leinster Championship. Obviously, they're home to, they obviously drew at Wexford already. Their next big game really in the Leinster Championship is against Dublin. They have them at home, so you would expect Galway to finish in the top 2 at this point. It would be probably a bit of a disaster really if they didn't.
But the way I was looking at it is, I'm kind of assuming that every team is going to beat Laois and Westmeath, which again is not being disrespectful. It's more like reality. So Galway have 3 points from 2 matches against Wexford and Kilkenny. Kilkenny have no points from 1 match against Galway, and Dublin have 2 points from 1 match against Wexford, and Wexford have 1 point from 2 matches against Galway. So I suppose that's complicated. But basically, if my permutations are correct, the Wexford and Kilkenny game is basically the knockout game. And now it's not a knockout game in the sense that Kilkenny could still get through by winning against Dublin, I think. But if Wexford beat Kilkenny, they'll more than likely go through at the expense of their fierce rivals. So I think that if my calculations are correct, that's the way it would work out. That if Wexford were to beat Kilkenny, Wexford would go through, and actually now thinking about it again, if Wexford were to beat Kilkenny, Wexford might go through, and I think Dublin might be eliminated then if they lost Kilkenny. So I suppose it's still plenty to play for, but I think Kilkenny probably will beat Wexford to avoid it all. It's probably looking like at the moment Kilkenny and Galway Leinster final. Galway in the Leinster final, and the winners of Dublin and Kilkenny would probably join them, and the other team would probably go into third at the moment. I think that's probably the most likely.
Yeah, and I suppose, what do you think Brian Cody will take away from this game, I suppose, in total? I mean, again, a lot of heart, desire in the second half, and certainly improved quite a lot in the second half. Obviously opened Galway up a couple of times for various different goals. TJ Reid goes off at half time. But at the same time, like, it's a hard one with Kilkenny. I don't really think they were terrible or anything like that. I don't think they were, bad or, dreadful or whatever. Like, I thought they played very well for large parts of the game, but Galway just pipped them in the end, really, by a strong first half showing. So, like, for Kilkenny, you certainly can't still, rule them out in many ways. I mean, you would expect them to be, Dublin definitely, because they have a great record against Dublin. Like, we never seem to really do well against Kilkenny at all since we last won the Leinster Championship. And Wexford, Kilkenny have certainly had their ups and downs, and you nearly put your money on that game being a draw, because it nearly always is. But what would be your what do you think Brian Cody will take away from that loss?
It's hard to know what he'll take. I think he'll take a bit of battling spirit, but again, he knows Kilkenny have that anyway. You know, that kind of way. Like, so we don't learn anything new. Like, I don't think we really learn much about Kilkenny. Only that they won't give up something that we already kind of knew. Like, the type of way. But I think it's very hard to know Kilkenny. The league, they lost to Cork, and Cork have lost 3 games since. It doesn't look like a brilliant result in hindsight. Like, they weren't fantastic in the league. Kilkenny, like Tipperary and Cork beat them. Like, what level are they at is a good question. The Dublin game probably be one that we'll know a bit more about. Like, both teams will kind of have to win that. So, but I don't know, Kilkenny, like, they got a draw yesterday. They would probably had 1 foot in it. Well, not 1 foot, but they would have been in a much better place to get to a Leinster final and All Ireland quarter final, so, or preliminary quarter final. But Cody he'd never be happy to lose in Kilkenny. But I suppose the reality is Galway probably have a better set of players than them at the moment. And I'd say he'd like to get Galway in a rematch in Croke Park. But then, on the other hand, I'd say Henry Shefflin wouldn't mind that either, like, because I say Galway could beat them by a bit more in an open field to Croke Park. Kind of way, it could be a bit of a different story again. So Kilkenny would be, I'd say Cody would be, he'd never say it publicly, but I'd say he'd be happy enough with the performance yesterday despite the defeat. And I'd say they'd be reasonably confident to turn over Dublin in the next game. But then Matty Kenny wouldn't be fearful of Kilkenny either. But I'd probably expect Kilkenny to beat Dublin, to be honest.
Yeah, I suppose when you look at the track record of the two teams, really, in the last 10 years or so, it generally has been Kilkenny who do seem to have Dublin's number very much at the moment. Running through the other 2 games in Leinster very quickly, I mean, Laois 12 points, Wexford 6-21. I mean, you see a scoreline like that, I don't really know what much to say, really. But Wexford, doing the job. It was obviously Dublin who finished with 27 points. Your own county there, Westmeath, with 116. I suppose the main takeaway, really, from looking at those both of those 2 scorelines is, could score difference come back to haunt Dublin here a bit, because they only beat Laois by, I think, 2 points in total. And obviously they've put up an 8-point win against Westmeath. I mean, it's a good scoreline to win a game in the Leinster Senior Hurling Championship, don't get me wrong. But when you're seeing this type of scores that Wexford are putting up, Galway are putting up, and Kilkenny will put up against these teams, could that maybe come back to haunt Dublin, do you think?
Not really, but I think the main thing for Dublin was beating Wexford. That was kind of the main game of the first 3. He was getting 2 points against Westmeath, or 4 points from the 2 games against Westmeath and Laois, and beating Wexford. And they managed to do so. Like, so despite Wexford beating Laois by a huge margin and Dublin beating Laois by 2 points, Dublin are still in a much, much better position. And barring a meltdown, Dublin are going to get through ahead of Wexford. Like, you barring probably an unlikely series of results. Like, that type of way, Aaron. So, like, if Dublin can get anything against Kilkenny, they're nearly guaranteed to get through. So Matty Kenny would be very, very pleased. Like, and I'd say he would have been happy if he said to him after the first 3 matches they'd have 6 points. He'd be delighted, and I wouldn't say he would care how they came by, because really and truly at this stage it's all about qualifying for the knockout stage. That's really. But now Dublin probably would love to win a Leinster title, but is the team good enough to beat Dublin or to beat Galway or Kilkenny? I'm not sure. They beat Galway the last twice. And could they beat Kilkenny in Croke Park? Probably could, I suppose. But Dublin, I'd say if they were offered 3rd before the year, while they never say it, they probably would have taken it, to be honest.
Yeah, and obviously for yourself as a Westmeath man, I mean, I was having a chat with Matthew Hurley from the GAA Statsman podcast there last week, and we were discussing some of the big one-sided results you obviously get in the Leinster Senior Hurling Championship at the minute, and it's obviously a given, really, that Laois and Westmeath will fairly, pretty confidently enough lose every game other than when they play each other. So, like, what are your thoughts on that? Obviously, when you're seeing your own county, Westmeath, go out and get 20, 30-point hammerings week in, week out, I mean, like, is there an argument there to do something with the Leinster Championship and move it around? I mean, it's a hard one, really, because I think Westmeath have earned the right to be in there, and I think Laois have earned the right to be in there because they've shown that they can consistently stay in the Leinster Senior Hurling Championship. But at the same time, you're looking at these results and Wexford putting up a 27-point win against Laois, and you're kind of wondering, really, like, what's the point, really,
Well, I just think it's a massive failure at the GAA, and it's 35, 140-year existence has been the failure to bring up more counties in hurling. Like, it's been the same counties here since day one, and it just seems to be getting wider, not narrower. And I don't know if there is any massive efforts there. I'm not sure now, but like, there is no right or wrong answer, and it just goes round and round in circles like Westmeath to try really hard, get a good managing setup, get good lads running the show, everything, but just comes back to the whole that they just seem to always fall short, and they could be sitting here 20, 30 years, the same 8 or 9 teams, and no improvement. So I just don't know what the solution is. Like, you go down to the B competitions and you might win them, but there's nobody at the matches, there's no coverage, no nothing. It's just there's no right or wrong. You're either going to be getting Hammerings in the A or playing in B's where nobody seems to really care. Like, so there is actually no real, there just seems to be no sort of promotion for this, and there is no grey area. Like, as we see Derry yesterday coming from Division 4 to beating the All-Ireland champions by 10 points, like, you couldn't just go around in a scenario where we're seeing someone like Leitrim hurlers beating Kilkenny by 20 points, which is the equivalent of 11-point win in hurling in Nolan Park. Like, that's never going to happen in our lifetime. I can safely say that now, without any sort of sense of that coming back to bite us. But I just don't think that I just don't see where, like, it just seems like, I don't know, can you see, Aaron, can you see a situation in the next 20 years where any sort of hurling team comes to be All-Ireland contenders? Like, and I'm not talking about winning the odd match or being there, but I'm actually talking about being genuine, serious contenders to win All-Ireland, and that would be the likes of Westmeath, Offaly, Antrim, Laois, Carlow actually being in an All-Ireland semi-final at Meredith and being there with a very good chance of victory,
Yeah, as you said there, like, there's no, when you look through the history, like when you look through the history books, really, there's no, it's kind of funny sometimes with Gaelic football. You look back at big shocks, big provincial shocks, big moments. Really hasn't been many in hurling. Like, you'd look at Dublin's rise maybe in 2013, 2011 as a sort of a surprise, but even at that, you'd look at obviously the resources that Dublin have and funding that's been pumped into Dublin and the amount of pitches, clubs that have been redeveloped and games development officers, all the rest. It's probably not that big of a surprise really when you look at the overall sort of impact of it. Maybe you could look at Limerick and sort of their rise. They were very much probably one of the weakest counties in Munster, but even at that, they're still a traditional hurling county. They've still had history of winning All-Irelands in the past, so, and history of having great hurlers. So yeah, you'd look at it and you think really that there's probably, you just don't see it. And I don't know if in counties like Leitrim and Cavan and all the rest and everywhere else, it's just kind of accepted really that they're not that good, and no one really wants to put in the effort, or no one wants to put in a bit of money or a bit of funding here or there, and it's just one of them things that's just accepted really, unfortunately. And I think the big thing really that probably needs to change, in my opinion, is more promotion for Joe McDonagh Cup and more of these games to be shown, because I feel like if they start to do that, maybe then people can get an interest. But like, if you're if you're a Down hurling fan, a staunch Down hurling fan, unless you're going to all the games, you're not going to see much about your county. You're not going to hear much about players. You're not, there's no promotion. There's no real sort of incentive to actually go and watch them,
No, and Down, my good friend Rowan Sheehan, his manager down in fierce nice fella, but he's doing great work in Down. But I suppose they're trying to, now, to be fair to Rowan, they're putting in genuine interest there, and they are trying to improve clubs, and they're doing everything off the pitch rather than just one kind of token gesture of bringing an outsider, these lads to kind of go in for a few years and kind of back to square one then. So Down are probably one county, but again, Down does have that slight bit of tradition that other counties mightn't have to that extent, But I suppose that's the way that the hurling is really, and unless the counties actually say, we're going to put in 10 new clubs, hire coaches, do massive fundraising, get every pitch, all this, and we're going to really try and compete, then it's not going to change. And like, realistically, our county's going to do that, not in my opinion, or not. Like, Dublin was a bit different. There was obviously the funding injection in Dublin, and it was kind of a rise. There was a few factors. There was obviously the population growth, the fact that a lot of the clubs in football also had the hurling strongholds. And Dublin, even that, Aaron, like, we're using them as an example, but they're still, in my opinion, they're still a long way off winning an All-Ireland hurling title, to be honest. Kind of way, as they did well, Anthony Daly was a reserve. Dalo did a great job in Dublin, but I don't think they're probably a great example to you. I suppose the only county I could see that has potential, even though the underage results have dried up, is Antrim, because they do have a bit of population in Antrim and there is that tradition. So the fact they have the city and they have the tradition, they might do something. But even then, can I see Antrim being All-Ireland contenders in the next 10 years? Probably not. And like, All-Ireland contenders is where Waterford are now, like the top 2 or 3 teams and banging on the door. I don't see All-Ireland contenders as being a county that gets within 7 points at the quarterfinal stage and goes out. I just don't see it on a personal level, to be honest.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would agree with you as well. I do think there is a lot of very good players coming through Dublin at the minute at under 20 level and minor level, but probably are just a good bit off potentially, challenging the big teams And I think definitely trying to win a Leinster championship really is probably the first step for Dublin hurling, really, before they can start thinking about All-Irelands or anything of that nature. I suppose before we finish up, we'll discuss the one game in the Munster Senior Hurling Championship, and that was Cork 220, Clare 28 points. Big win for Clare, you know, that's back-to-back wins now. They obviously got that big win over Tipperary last weekend as well. 2 defeats on the spin now for Cork, so big disappointment for them. But for Clare, they're motoring very, very well, and they're certainly going under the radar, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, I suppose we'll start with Cork. Just after last year's Ireland final, I thought, naively in hindsight, that Cork were a county that were really coming, that they had really young team. The setup looked very, very good. They got an awful beating in the final, but I thought that was kind of a young team just getting there, and next year the gap was closed. And my opinion was reinforced with the league. I thought that they were flying in the league. They looked excellent. They looked like they had turned the corner. The league final, Waterford, just momentum stalled totally since then. They haven't been able to get going at all, and they're just back to square one now. And I'd argue they've actually taken a step backwards since last year, nearly, because Clare, they had beaten Clare last year in thirds in the qualifiers. Now, to be fair to Clare, they've got a few lads back, like Peter Logan and these lads, but having said that, Cork should be. I'm very disappointed with Cork yesterday. Now, I think, Aaron, if that match had gone ahead in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, now, the fact there was a 2-point is very unfair on Cork. Just following on Twitter, it looked like Clare were 7 or 8 points better than they had a red card as well. So, but if it was in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, Clare, it certainly would have been worth a few extra points to Cork, and it wouldn't have been, like, there was 20,000 at the match yesterday. I'm only going to predict, I'm not going to try and predict how many Cork Clare fans, but Clare mightn't even have brought 1,000 fans to Cork. Do you know, it would have been all red, and Cork really do get behind the team at home. And I think if it was in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, the outcome might have been different, but look, that's neither here nor there. Now, I suppose I can't see Cork winning in Walsh Park at the moment, but if they do manage to win out of nowhere against Waterford, then suddenly you're looking at a path where they're playing a Tipperary team who probably have a dead rubber game. Maybe if they lose to Limerick, they could be playing Tip in a dead rubber game. They could be playing a preliminary quarter-final against the Joe McDonagh finalists or winners, and then playing an All-Ireland quarter-final against the Leinster runners-up. So suddenly you're looking at 3 winnable games where Cork could be going into the All-Ireland semi-final with a lot of momentum. But having said that, it all relies on them winning in Walsh Park, and at the moment I don't see Cork winning in Walsh Park, to be honest. And I think Kieran Kingston's 3-year term is up at the end of this year. I don't think you'd seek to have that term extended if Cork don't get out with the group, to be honest with Jaron, you know.
Yeah, and I suppose from a Clare point of view, I mean, a team that's definitely improving quite a lot. Obviously, with Tony Kelly hitting 10 points on the day, Peter Duggan's obviously come back in there as well. You know, you've Ian Galvin, obviously, before he got sent off, Ryan Taylor. I mean, so much options really all across the pitch. Cathal Malone in around the middle. I mean, Clare, I mean, could they be a side really that are sort of dark horses or going under the radar in terms of the overall All-Ireland big picture? Because as you were saying before, even if they finish third, let's say in the Munster Championship, let's say they get beat by Limerick and Waterford, which, you know, I'm not even, you know, I think they could really give a good battle to those two sides, and I think they could potentially cause a big shock to either one of those counties. But you're looking at it and thinking, you know, getting to an All-Ireland semi-final, it's not exactly inconceivable at this stage for a county like Clare, and maybe when you've got Limerick and Waterford at 1 and 2, you know, Clare probably aren't too far behind the chasing pack that is probably Waterford as number 2 at the minute.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I suppose it'd be very unfair not to mention Clare after their excellent performance yesterday and against Tip. They played really well in 2 games. Brian Lohan's doing a great job. It's a very proud hurling county. Tony Kelly is obviously exceptional. Peter Duggan's exceptional. They have a few very, very good hurlers, and they'll be very hard beaten. And I suppose we'll know an awful lot, because Ennis has traditionally been a very happy ground for Clare, and if they can win if they can beat Waterford or Limerick in Ennis, they'll be guaranteed a place in the Munster final. And again, it goes back to what we were saying about Derry there with avoiding Kerry and Dublin. If Clare were to get to a Munster final, they'd avoid Limerick and Waterford until the All-Ireland final. And also, Clare haven't won an All-Ireland final in nearly 30 years, or a Munster title in nearly 30 years, if my knowledge is correct. I don't think they've won it since 95 there. So maybe 97 at the very latest. But Clare had the fact they haven't won it for that long. That was Munster is really on the lips of a lot of Clare people, and they would absolutely love to get to a Munster final and play against Limerick or Waterford or Cork. But Cork won't be getting to the final. I don't think they can mathematically get there. But to get to a Munster final would be huge, and they would have had to beat Waterford or Limerick in Ennis. Now, where Clare could really benefit is that if Limerick are to beat Tipperary, they'll be guaranteed to go through ahead of that. And when they were guaranteed to be in the top 3 in 2019, John Kiley rested a lot of lads for the last round against Tip, which Tip actually won, Tipperary. And if they do that, if Kiley does that again, presuming Limerick beat Tip, then Clare have a real chance of beating them in Ennis, and then Clare will be in a Munster final. John Kiley doesn't seem to be too bothered about the Munster Championship once they get through. He wants to be in the top 3, and after that, doesn't really seem to bother him that much. Now, if they get to the Munster final, he'll go to win it. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think he's going to be. He's not I don't think Kylie's obsessed about winning Munster. He wants to win the All Ireland, which is understandable totally. But Clare would love a crack at Munster, and if they could avoid a Limerick or Waterford to the All Ireland final, it's very hard to see them not getting to the All Ireland final. You know.
Yeah, and as you were saying there as well, like I suppose earlier about Cork, I mean, very disappointing result, I suppose, for them. They were obviously chasing the game for large parts, really, and it's hard to know really with Cork because, as you were saying before, like I was kind of the same agreement really of you. Like when they lost to Limerick, like they've been very successful, obviously at under 20 level, minor level, plenty of players coming through. They still have a great bunch of players already in there, and Horgan, Fitzgibbon, a few of the other lads. So it's hard to know. Like, where do you think it's really gone wrong for them this year? I mean, it's obviously 3 defeats on the spin now, in total, obviously counting that league final. And although this game finished a lot closer, Clare probably were very comfortable for large parts. So where do you think it's gone wrong for the Rebels this year?
Well, I was at the Cork match against Limerick last year in the final and semi-final against Kilkenny. I was at the league final this year against Waterford, and I was at the first round of Munster against Limerick. And the biggest criticism I have from Cork is they don't seem to learn from the mistakes, the shortcomings from previous matches, and they seem to kind of do more or less the same thing and play into other teams' hands constantly. And I think that's probably where they go. And I think the fact Limerick gets a bit of a beating. It wasn't losing to Limerick that was the issue for Cork. It was more the manner of it. They kind of they didn't really die with their boots on, did they? Like, and I was down there, Aaron, in Portcuid with that game. It felt like very much like a league game. It was just, there was no atmosphere, even though it was championship. The place was full. It was record. It should have been a great day, and it wasn't. It was just the opposite. There was no energy in the crowd, and they are a very loud crowd. They're great fans. I always give a good comparison. I always think Cork hurlers are a bit like Dublin footballers are. It's the biggest sport in a big city, and everyone gets behind the team. And I suppose this is not being stereotypical or anything, but a lot of people that would follow the Cork team wouldn't necessarily be hugely involved in grassroots GAA, and it's like a lot of the people who follow Dublin footballers mightn't necessarily be involved in grassroots GAA in Dublin. Type way, there'd be a lot of people who would just be huge Dublin fans and see a real identity with the team, and it's the same in Cork, but they really do get great fans on their day, but like, it's a pity. I just kind of feel sorry for the live fans. They just seem to have very, very little to cheer about over the last 17 years, and it's more of it this year. And now I just think I'd love to see them go to Walsh Park and win. It would be a real statement, and it would be a real 2 fingers up for this Cork team to the critics who have been very, very vocal and won't be silent them anymore. But I suppose in hindsight, Clare winning yesterday wasn't really a shock. And I don't know, I just think Waterford, they'd love to really put Cork out of the championship and do it inside, to be honest with Jaron,
Yeah, I think so as well. Like, and that's the interesting one with Cork, is seems to be 1 step forward, 2 steps back consistently with them. You think of 2018 when they got to that All Ireland semi-final, probably should have beat Limerick that day, go out, then obviously do nothing in 2019, get beaten in the quarterfinals. It just seems to be 1 step forward, 2 steps back a lot of the time with the Cork hurlers. Just running through some of the John McDonough Cup games there briefly. It was Antrim 222, Carlow 122. It was Kerry 625, Meath 13 points, and then Down 218, Offaly 126. Any thoughts on any of them results there? I suppose big win for Offaly against Down. You'd probably fancy Offaly and Antrim really to be in that top 2, I suppose, and be in that Joe McDonough Cup final at the end of the season.
You probably would. I think it's a 3-horse race between Antrim, Offaly, and Kerry at the moment officially. But Antrim, I think they're going to beat Meath as well. If they're in the final, which I would say they will. I think they're going to win one of the last 2 games. So I think we can nearly put Antrim in the final, and I think that the Offaly and Kerry could. I'm not sure if it's a playoff because Kerry lost to Down. It probably Offaly still might be able to afford another slip up, but probably will be Offaly Antrim. At the moment, I'd fancy Antrim to win. I think they have a very good set of hurlers, and Darren Gleeson's done a very nice job there. And I suppose probably in contradiction to what we were saying earlier, he has genuinely helped Antrim improve a lot, Darren Gleeson, since he came in. And I fancy this to be their year. And I suppose one more thing is, like, and I suppose this is probably looking a bit ahead, but the winners and the runners up of the Joe McDonough do play the 3rd place team in Munster and Leinster. Now, I'm not sure exactly which team plays which, but if Antrim were to get, and I suppose Maddie Kenny won't let me hear it, but if Antrim were to get Dublin or a Wexford in Cork and Park, now Dublin have always had a number, but I'd expect Dublin or Wexford to win, but it certainly would not be easy up in Cork and Park, and that would be actually a good occasion, bringing a big hurling game to Cork and Park or to Ballycastle or to Dunloy, one of those grounds in Antrim. But Antrim are a good team, but Offaly are not bad either. Now, they probably were very poor in the relegation. They have Antrim have beaten them twice this year, but the last Joe McDonough game, against Antrim, Offaly competed very, very well. But I probably fancy Antrim to win that competition just at the early team, and Kildare to win the Christy Ring and push at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose before we finish up then, who would be your player of the week in both football and hurling? Obviously a lot of top players, I suppose, across both codes this weekend, but who would you be looking at?
Player of the week. Jesus, it's a It's a tricky one, I suppose. We'll start with the football. I suppose I'm going to pick out someone, probably a bit of a left field choice. I'm going to go for Conor Doherty in Derry. I thought he was absolutely excellent yesterday against Tyrone. I thought Doherty really stood out. He was probably man of the match on the day. I suppose the hurling one is tricky. There, who we go for? We'll go for one of the Clare players. I thought Clare were absolutely superb yesterday, and I suppose it's a tricky one, player of the week. I suppose the way he's returned, probably Peter Duggan will go with him. Should player of the week. He's kind of put in, given a new dimension to the Clare team. But I didn't actually get seeing the match yesterday, Clare, to be honest with you. So I don't want to kind of be going rushing to assumptions. But I suppose we'll go with with Peter Duggan for Clare for hurler of the week for the moment.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. I'll probably go with Con O'Callaghan from a Dublin perspective. Obviously, having him back in the team, 1-5 in the second half versus Wexford was very impressive. And Joseph Cooney, I thought, was very good for Galway against Kilkenny. But yeah, can't argue with obviously the influence of Peter Duggan on that Clare side, and undoubtedly he'll be a big player for Clare this year. I suppose, Conor, appreciate you jumping on, and I'm sure we'll get you on in the future at some point.
Oh, no problem at all, Aaron. Thanks very much for having me. Cheers, folks.